see, last thing. Y'all must have said something. You run her off.
I'm innocent, I tell you.
Okay. Oh, man. Holy cow. Okay, well, hopefully that that got it going to that other one. All right. So I think we got all of our buttons pushed, and I think everybody, if you missed it before, I got behind because I was showing Ed how tasty my bourbon pickled okra was. So eat your heart out, guys.
Hey, if the okra turned black because we forgot to put it in the refrigerator, is it bad?
I wouldn't eat it.
Okay, see?
I wouldn't eat it. That might.
He said, yeah, he said he wouldn't eat it, but that.
That's yeah, I'd wait. Just wait until next week. I'll bring you some more. I picked another. I mean, I picked that harvest basket I've got. I picked it full today. So yeah, with this rain that we got, it's just exploding. So all right, well, let's get started here. If I can get all of my buttons pushed and everything up here tonight, because I want to welcome everybody here tonight, and we're going to be talking about just the last half of chapter 37, because the next two chapters are a unit. 38 and 39, they're talking about the coming invasion of Israel. It hasn't happened yet. It's going to be it's an end time thing. So I wanted to cover that as a unit. And then this one here is talking about two sticks. And so I've kind of expanded it a little bit to talk about how does that apply to anything today. And so we're just going to go ahead and get cracking on this now. Let's begin with the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who sanctifies us with his commandments and commands us to engross ourselves in the words of Torah. Pat's missing one of her dogs.
Well,
So.
I'm trying to get him out of here. So
Okay.
They start barking after dark.
The dogs start barking. They go on their tiger patrol and start barking, keeping the tigers away. So far, they've done a great job. I haven't seen one single tiger out there. All right, so muting everyone. You know the rules. If you got something to say, just unmute yourself and say away. So let's go ahead with like right here. We're talking about we're in chapter 37, and then 38 and 39 is a unit, and we'll go into that next week. And just so that you know, next week, yeah, we'll be here next week. But the 18th, we will not be here because I will be celebrating a new home and doing a mezuzah installation on the home of Michael and Jeannie McGuckin. So that will be I'll be up there all day long. So we won't have the class that night on the 18th. All right. So let's go ahead here. Ezekiel 37:15. The word of Adonai came to me saying, "You, son of man, take one stick and write on it for Judah, for Bnei Israel joined with him. Then take another stick and write on it for Joseph, the stick of Ephraim, and all the house of Israel joined with them. Join them one to another for yourself as one stick, so that they may become one in your hand." All right. So the Lord had commanded Ezekiel to take these two sticks, and he was to write on one of them for Judah, and the other one, and for the sons of Israel, his companions, and write on the other one for Joseph and his companions. And so I was trying to find my other stick that I've got here, but I'll just use two pencils instead. So if just imagine that I'd written on one pencil for Judah and the other one for Joseph, because basically one stick represented the Jews of the southern kingdom, namely Judah and Benjamin, and then the other stick for Ephraim represented all of the northern kingdoms of the 10 tribes. And so he was to put these together in one stick. And so if you don't know that I had two pencils here, you'd think I had this one real long pencil. A lot of the videos that you see will show the people, they'll take in the two sticks and they're holding them like this, and then there's other ones that they're holding them in and the end of it is like this, and just all sorts of stuff. So we don't know what Ezekiel did, but he was a master of demonstration, and in a lot of his sermons he was like the original illustrated sermon guide. And so but he was to take them and make them one stick. So and I think it makes sense to me that he would have taken them and made them end to end, as that would be like one stick. But at the other side, I've seen where that somebody has taken a stick or something this big around, and they've taken like in a bandsaw and kind of twisted it and made it to where then when they put them together, it comes back together as one stick, and everybody goes ooh ah, and so and that's fine. But we don't know how he did it and what in what way. I know pretty much for a fact that Ezekiel did not have a bandsaw, so or a jigsaw, so he probably didn't do that. I would think that he just stuck them end to end, and that made one stick. And so now there's other interpretations for this. One of them was that Mormonism teaches that the two sticks represent the Bible. That's the stick of Judah, and the stick of Joseph was the Book of Mormon. But the rest of the passage refutes that altogether and says, nah, that's not what it is. So if we went ahead to verse 18, when the children of your people speak to you saying, won't you tell us what you mean by these? Say to them, thus says Adonai Elohim, behold, I will take the stick of Joseph, which is in the hand of Ephraim, and the tribes of Israel joined with him, and I will put them together with the stick of Judah and make them one stick. They will be one in my hand, God's hands. So when Ezekiel's audience asked him about what the symbolic act that he's doing, what it represented, he was to tell them that the Lord said this: he would combine the two parts, the two entities of Israel, into one nation again. They had been separated for 500 years, 400 years, something like that. And ever since Solomon died, and they had Rehoboam and Jeroboam, and then they split off and went north and stayed and Judah stayed in Jerusalem, and so then for the next several hundred years they fought each other, and so they, in some cases they considered themselves enemies, and even though they were all Jews. And so this promise refutes the teaching of British Israelism, which we're going to talk about in just at the end of the lesson, and that other groups that hold that the 10 northern tribes were lost, and then later it became some national entity that was not Jewish. So we know comparatively little about the history of the exiled northerners. They just kind of assimilated, but there's no evidence of them making an actual return back into the land. There were others that stayed there, and they were kind of assimilated by the Assyrians. And then what happened is that the population was so watered down, and to this day, the Samaritans, the people of Samaria, have a form of Judaism. They celebrate the Passover, and they slaughter a lamb and do those things. So they have a form of it. And then in Yeshua's time, of course, the Jewish people looked at the Samaritans with disdain. They were half-breeds in their mind. They were not really Jews. They were outcasts. They called them dogs and all sorts of other nasty stuff. So they really weren't nice to each other. And so that was one of the things that when Yeshua was at the well in Samaria, and he was talking to this Samaritan woman, and she was surprised that a Jewish man would even speak to her. And then, of course, in the course of the conversation, he offered her eternal life if she would just believe in him. So, but we know pretty much about that the tribes were assimilated and they've taken out. And there's an awareness of the northern tribes in Assyria in the apocryphal book of Tobit says that. And also these Jews were taken out into the other parts of Assyria 100 years before Jerusalem fell. And so in the long term of things, 100 years is not a whole lot of time. And so I think we can assume then that when Babylon then conquered Assyria, which wasn't very long after Assyria had taken over Israel, the Jews were still there. So they may not have been in Israel, but they were over there in that fertile crescent of Babylon. And so basically what I'm trying to say is they were not lost. They may have been hiding, but they were not lost. All right. And so I made the point here that they were not the ancestors of the British. Okay, we're going to be talking about what I meant by that. And so just hang with me there. All right. The two sticks that you ride on will be in your hand before their eyes. Then say to them, thus says Adonai Elohim, behold, I will take Bnei Israel from among the nations where they have gone. I will gather them from every side and bring them into their land. I will make one nation in the land on the mountains of Israel, and one king will be king to them all. They will no longer be two nations and never again be divided into two kingdoms. So Ezekiel, he was supposed to hold these sticks there, and which he had written that what the Lord had told him in the sight of the exiles. He was supposed to show this to them and explain to them that God had promised to bring the exiles back. He was going to gather them from all the kingdoms, wherever they were in the land. And he would make one united kingdom of them again and set one king over all of them. Now, they would no longer be two nations, a divided kingdom. All right. So, has this happened yet? Even during the time of Yeshua, where you had Herod and the Hasmonean kings and so forth. It was not really, one nation, because the Romans had already taken over some stuff, and it was divided. And then they had the Samaritans, and they were kind of separated off, and so it never was a really united Israel, and it will not be a united Israel until the millennial time. Even today, there's people that look at Israel and they talk about the occupied territories. Well, depends on who you call the occupiers. I think that Israel owns the land. Those other guys are the occupiers. They're the ones that are, maybe they're the squatters, would be more likely. But that's not politically correct. So I shouldn't. We'll just leave it at that. Okay. I look at. All right, go ahead.
Excuse me. Didn't Israel give them that land?
No,
in
this
40s or
that was part of
70s
it was divided up in the Balfour Mandate, and so these areas were given to the Arabs, and so that then they had Israel had Gaza, and then Shimon Peres decided, guess what? We're just going to give Gaza back to the Palestinians, and within a matter of just weeks and months.
And now they're a thorn in their side.
Well, not only that, but I mean the whole economy of the region just went in the tank, and so and you could see it when you're over there. If you can see the difference when something is owned by Israelis, what it looks like, or something that is owned or operated or occupied by the other guys. The difference is very, very stark. Let's just say it that way. And so but God said he's gonna get the nation together, one whole nation, and it will never be divided again. So we're not there yet, because it's still divided. When you go to places, they got this wall around the occupied territories. So that is not one nation. That's still divided. So they will never again be defiled with their idols, their detestable things, or with any of their transgressions. I will save them out of all their dwellings in which they sin. I will purify them. Then they will be my people, and I will be their God. My servant David will be a king over them. They will all have one shepherd. They will walk in my ordinances and observe my rulings and do them. They will live in the land that I gave to my servant Jacob, where your ancestors lived. They will live there, their children, and their children's children forever. And my servant David will be their prince forever. All right. So we got a little explaining to do here. Said Israel would no longer defile themselves with idols or the detestable things or the offenses of the Lord. That they would no longer defile the Mosaic covenant. And for the most part, and that part has come true, because before, Israel had all these idols and everything, all of the high places and all that kind of stuff. But in this, when they came back from the Babylonian exile, pretty much they had learned their lesson about the idolatry stuff. They had a different system of worship in that. They also had synagogues that were local in their own little hometown, so that they had a place where they could go and be trained and on a weekly basis hear from the Word of God how they should live. So Israel never did go back into the idolatry that was practiced prior to the exile. However, are they what we would call a God-fearing nation now? No, really, not really. So I was reading something that said that maybe only 5% of the Jews that are in Israel call themselves observant or practicing Jews. So, we're just not there yet. So the Lord promised to deliver them from the many places where they'd gone and sinned, and he was going to cleanse them. How is that going to happen? We don't know yet. Just God said he's going to do it. Then they would enter into a proper relationship with him. In the present state of Israel, like I said, there's only about 5% of the population that is actively religious. And the person of Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus, the Messiah, the Christ, is actually more firmly rejected in Israel than almost anywhere else in the world. They just pretty much, they'll throw up the blinder. No, we don't go with this Jesus guy. So these verses address 4 dimensions of ancient perceptions of national identity, and so it's a healthy relationship between Israel and their patron deity. Remember what I'd said about every country has its own God, its own deity, and so that's their mindset back in those days. That Israel, we've got our God and he is here. Well, in Babylon, they've got Marduk and the Philistines. They have this one, and then however it was. But we, as Jews, we have the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and they really had no problem with all those other guys having their little g gods, and the other nations same way. We've got our God, and we have our God, and the other we really don't have a problem with the Jews having their God. That's just the way it was. So one of the guys that I've been reading in preparing for this lesson is Daniel Block, and he called these are the 4 dimensions that he was talking about. That there would be an ethnic integrity of people that were actually, they talked about they were Jewish and they could identify as Jewish. There would be a territorial integrity where there would be land boundaries that were recognized, and everyone would abide by those land boundaries. And today we don't have that, because you have people that say no, the Palestinians own the land outright and Israel is just occupying it. And then other ones, Israel won territory in the 67 war, I believe it was, where they took over the Golan Heights, and now they've taken it over and settled it, and they've got great agriculture there, and wineries, and lots and lots of minefields that are still left over from that time period, and they haven't gone in there and demine them, because it's a deterrent to the Jordanians or the Syrians that would try to make a land crossing in there. They just left the mines from where the Jordanians and the Syrians had put them when they controlled the land. So and then you had political integrity. So here again, they would be rulers of their own people. They wouldn't have the idea of a foreign power ruling over Israel. And finally, there would be spiritual integrity, that the nation of Israel would recognize as a whole the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as their God. And guess what? This will all take place in the millennial time period. Well, then there's this thing about where it says that he said, my servant David would rule over the Jews and be their king. Well, and he said that they would only have one king who would shepherd them. Well, who was the shepherd king? And then who later on was the good shepherd? Of course, we look at this as being Yeshua. He was the shepherd, the good shepherd, he called himself. And so he's the one. He's in the line of David. And that was language of the day back in those days when you talked about a king. This would be, it would be the Davidic line, or David would be ruling over him. And that's basically what it said, the line of David, the ancestor, the descendants of David would then be ruling over Israel. Okay, so Israel will enjoy these realities, a new commitment to God's will, and they will occupy their hereditary homeland forever. And then the rule of David, the rule of Yeshua in Jerusalem, it would be a forever thing. Once the millennium comes about, sure, Yeshua will be reigning from Jerusalem for 1,000 years, but he never quits reigning after that 1,000 years is over, and the end time the things that happen in the end time. So that part of the prophecy has not yet come to pass. This would be now, and I also think that what we have to look at, this is not just a spiritual. In fact, I don't think much of any of this is a spiritual prophecy so much as it is a literal physical prophecy where Israel will come back to the land and they will do all of these things that God says that they will do. So there is that. Okay, so any comments or questions so far? All right, let's look at this part here. It says, I will cut a covenant of shalom with them. I will be an everlasting covenant with them. It will be an everlasting covenant with them. I will give to them and multiply them. I will set up my sanctuary among them forever. My dwelling place will be over them. I will be their God, and they will be my people. Then the nations will know that I am Adonai, who sanctifies Israel, when my sanctuary is in their midst forever. So the Lord promised, again, this covenant of peace with his people. He would plant them securely in the land and then multiply their numbers. Their population is going to, increase like that when they were in Egypt. Even though it was harsh and everything, their population was increasing supernaturally, really. He said he would set his sanctuary in their midst forever. So he's going to be ruling from Jerusalem forever. This is not going to be a temporary thing like the tabernacle was, or even the temples, because those proved to be not everlasting. The first temple was destroyed. Then, 500 years later, the second temple was destroyed. And so this time it's a forever thing. He would establish an intimate relationship with them. and the people of the world, everyone, would know that he's God. He set aside Israel as sacred for his glory and a special purpose. These are, the Jewish people, the Israelites, are God's chosen people, and he did it because he wanted to. And so he would set up his sanctuary in Israel forever. Okay, so there's God's saying to you today, though, that you're dead if you're not a believer. Okay, dry bones, hear the word of God. Remember, we had the dry bones last week. You come to life, and one of the things that we should know is we should be believers, accept Yeshua as your Savior. And this is an application that you can draw actually from this portion of Scripture. But remember that the subject of the prophecy is the nation of Israel. Now, one of you has sent me some stuff in the mail talking about what I had said last week or the week before, maybe, about whenever we look at end time prophecy, we have to remember that is Israel centric. Okay, so, and actually Rich is not here tonight, so I'll have to get back with him separately. But no, I am not at all pushing Yeshua or Jesus aside when I'm saying that all end time prophecy is Israel centric, because you cannot separate Israel from the Messiah. They're so they're entwined, you cannot separate them. What happens with Israel is a direct relationship or directly tied to what Yeshua is or what he is doing. So when I say everything is Israel centric, that I'm just saying that, okay, you have to look at everything through the eyes that, okay, God is taking care of his chosen people, and the idea that even Rome or Germany or Russia, or Gog and Magog, all those guys there, okay, there are the United States. We're on the periphery. Whatever happens is going to happen, but God is going to always take care of his people. He will have a redeemed people. And so that's kind of what I'm saying. Maybe I didn't say it very well before, but that's what I meant by the idea of everything is Israel centric. So the words forever and everlasting occur 5 times in just these 4 verses. The reestablished Israelites will live in the land forever. They will have an everlasting king, an everlasting covenant, and an everlasting sanctuary. So there are also 13 promises in these verses from 15 to 28, and 10 of the promises are I will, where God says, I will do this. So, that's why I say, how could God make his plans for Israel any clearer than that? So, both the visions in this chapter, the dry bones and then the 2 sticks, have been understood to be fulfilled by the, people say, well, this was fulfilled by the return of the Jews from Babylonian captivity. But it cannot be, because we can just look there and see, okay, yeah, maybe they didn't get into idolatry anymore, but they're sure not following Torah to the extent that they should. And they don't have that intimate relationship as a whole, don't have that intimate relationship with the Father, because they have not accepted the Son. All right. So what I wanted to do is, and the last thing here is that when this all happens, all of the nations will know that the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is the one true ruler of all of the universe. And remember, they will be required to come into Jerusalem with an offering every year at Sukkot. And if they don't, then the Lord says, it's not going to rain on their country. And what that means is that if in an agricultural society, what happens if you don't get rain? You have no crops, your economy dies. There's famine, your people die. So God is saying, if they don't recognize and honor the Yeshua in the temple and God in heaven every year at Sukkot and don't bring an offering, then their economy is going to go in the tank. It's just going to go away. And so it would behoove every nation to recognize that God is there, and God is in Jerusalem, and He is the God of the universe. He's the creator, and there's no other gods there's just no other gods, period. Okay, so Carmen.
Yes, I have a question. Who are the nations? Who are all these nations? Are we part of those nations?
Sure. It says all nations, and that would include everybody else except Israel.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
When it says all nations, it just means that, exactly what it says, all nations. And it doesn't have to,
Well, I didn't know if it was before our time, all those nations, or.
Well, no, I think this is going to be one of those things where at the end of time, that the entire world, all the world, the Bible says every knee will bow and every tongue confess Yeshua is the Lord. Okay, so that means that
all is all.
ALL. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
All right. Good deal. All right. So now, what I wanted to do for the next few minutes, and I don't want to dive into this too much, but some people have asked me questions, and so I wanted to kind of get into this two-stick, or now it's become two-house theology. And you will find this in the Hebrew roots movement. All right, what is Hebrew roots movement? We'll get into that in a second. But this two-stick, two-house theology, some of the things that they hold on to is that there's a thing called British Israelism. It's also called Anglo Israelism. It's a theological belief that the Anglo Saxons and the associated cultures of Northwestern Europe, the Aryan nations, even as it were, and in particular, Great Britain, are the actual racial, physical descendants of the tribes of Israel. So thus, by extension, the North Americans, including both the US and Canadians, are supposedly composed of the same descendants of the ancient Israelites. All right. So that's kind of their premise. And so this theology is based on the myth that the 10 northern tribes of Israel wandered into the lands of Northwestern Europe, when they were exiled by the Assyrians, that they wandered into Northwestern Europe and settled there after being exiled by the Assyrians in the 8th century BC. Okay. And so, the northern tribes, Israel fell in 722 BCE. So there is absolutely zero, nada, zip, squat, historical, archaeological, biblical, or any other kind of evidence in support. This theory, it became very popular in the 18th and 19th century as Great Britain became the leading world power. And so for a lot of their followers and proponents of this, the theory has a broader application that includes not just England, but the people of Germany who have a historic blood kinship with the British. back in those days, their ruling houses, their ruling regimes would marry off each other, and there was kind of a closed circuit, and then that's why there were some really, really strange, aberrant DNA that came out of all of this interbreeding between the royalties of Northern Europe. So now others would also include most of the Protestant Northwest Europe, including the Netherlands and Scandinavia, as part of this broad Anglo-Israelite fold. And so the great national successes of Britain and Germany as leaders of post-industrial revolution Europe in the 19th and the early 20th century was often they would herald this as a kind of confirmation, as it were, that the people of Northern Europe were in fact of Israelite descent, and therefore we were the chosen people of God, destined to rule the world. And so that's what they were trying to hang on to, that chosen people of God. So that's what that's what that two-house movement, the Hebrew roots thing. And so part of that, and if you've not heard some of this stuff, maybe this is new to you, but I didn't know about this until quite a few years ago now. But I was still working in the oil business and living in Mississippi, and then we went to a congregation that was part of this Hebrew roots movement, which, quite frankly, I had not really run across before. And so it was an eye-opener for me. And after being there a couple of months, and the people there were just lovely people. They were nice. They were sincerely wrong, but they were sincere. And eventually I just told their congregation leader there, I said, okay, tell you what, I've got to go, because whenever you speak up there, people turn around to me and look and see what my reaction is, because I'd already let them know that in real Judaism we don't do that. We don't do those things that you're talking about. Mainly one of them was the idea of Gentiles having to be Gentile males. They have to be circumcised if they're a believer in Yeshua. And so they were practicing that, and they even had a local urologist that would perform this operation for them for $500 or something like that. And when I talked to him about what Galatians said and so forth, with Paul, I said, yeah, but Paul really didn't mean what he said there. And because if you look in the epistle of Barnabas, it says something completely different, and then Thomas, and and so on and so forth. And they would bring out these books that did not make it into the canon. And so anyway, one of the things that the Hebrew roots folks, you will note about them is they're well known for the use of the sacred name, the Yod He Vav He, that's in the Bible, the 4 letters. And this the common phrase or common word there, and it's not universal within the Hebrew roots groups, because I have been invited to go and just sit in with some of these groups, and it was quite interesting that they had like 3 or 4 guys get up and do a little 20-minute something or another, and each one of them kind of had a different way of different interpretation of what the sacred name of God was and what Yeshua's name is supposed to be. And it was all just a little bit different, but they were right, and the other guys, you have a right to be wrong, but our group here is right. And so a lot of times what they will do is they use the, and I see this among Christian theologians all over the place. You know, it just drives me crazy trying to read some of their books. The idea of the Yahweh, they will use this word, their version or their thought about what is the proper way to pronounce the Yod He Vav He, and they will use Yahweh all the time. And one theologian, author, said, you know, I know that this is offensive to Jewish people that we use this Yahweh because they don't do it, but I'm going to use it anyway. And so, you know, that some of these guys I know personally, I've met with them, I've spoken, I've, you know, eaten dinner with them. And so we just, some things you just, you know, you just let go, even though they've written lots of books and they're, you know, college professors and seminarians and all that kind of stuff. You just, you know, just let it go. Then they use also this, the word Yahshua, because they're trying to pull that Yah thing into the idea of Yahweh, and they put a lot of emphasis on the Yah, Y-A-H. And yeah, while there are instances where in the Bible that has been a name for you know, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, you know, it's not widespread. And so a lot of the many of the two-housers, as we call them, the Hebrew roots folks, they see the evangelical church as pagan because, among other reasons, it uses the Greco Roman names of Jesus and Lord instead of their Yahshua or whatever their Yahushua or you know, the you know, like I said, there's several names and I can't keep up with all of them, but you know, to go around calling somebody pagan because you happen to pronounce the Son of God's name a little different than somebody else, to me, you know, that's offensive. You know, I've lived all over the world, been to about 76 countries, lived in quite a few of them, and depending on the country, you know, they will pronounce my name completely. I mean, it's just completely different. You know, you go down to Central South America and it's not Steve or whatever, it's Esteban. You know, I know that. I answer to that, especially when they're calling me to dinner. And so the idea that God doesn't recognize when you're calling on him, whatever name you use. And so, you know, and then, you know, oh, in Japan, Shika-san, you know, and so that was, it was funny, but, you know, I know what they call me. And saying God knows when people call on the name of Yeshua, on Jesus, that they're sincere. And this idea that the sacred namers come up with, that says that if you don't say the name and pronounce it exactly the right way, God's not going to hear your prayers. Well, that's just bogus. It's just not right. And so the two-housers, the sacred namers, they will use this Yahshua instead of the Hebraically correct Yeshua. And that distinguishes themselves from the Messianic Jews that don't know Hebrew. See, so because they pray to the one true sacred name, God, however they pronounce it, they assume that they have more favor with God than we do. So, you know, the way I look at it is the vilest sinner has just as much sway with God. When he calls on the name of God, God's going to listen to that guy. If he's repenting, God's going to listen to him no matter what he calls him. And so anyway, this sacred name stuff is we don't we just disregard that in the greater Messianic movement, and I'm speaking mostly from the MJAA, the Messianic Jewish Alliance of America, IAMCS, the International Association of Messianic Congregations and Synagogues, and the UMJC, the Union of Messianic Jews, Jewish Congregations. So that's, to me, that is the mainstream of Messianic Judaism. All right. So we talk about the anybody got any questions on this so far? Have I sufficiently offended most of you in a way? All right. Let's look at the Hebrew roots and just talk about a little bit about that. The unifying message of the Hebrew roots is the mistaken belief that all people everywhere, Jew and Gentile alike, should be keeping the law of Moses. Now, before you get upset with me, just hang in there. This overarching message of the one law, one people, it finds a lot of favor in this with this group that have an agenda concerning Israel identity issues. Now, what do I mean by that? As I said, this is why the core leadership of the Hebrew Roots movement was formed by and is occupied by the two house teachers. All right, we could go into some of these guys, but the Hebrew Roots movement of the 21st century is a culmination of many, many years of erroneous teaching going back to the Millerites in the 1800s, I think to some extent the Seventh-day Adventists, and then the Worldwide Church of God and so forth. It came out of that into now what we call the Hebrew Roots deal. But when they're talking about one law, and why I say no, the one law, one people thing is in errors, because there are certain things that are required of Jewish people that are not biblically required of Gentiles. Now, if somebody wants to follow in the Jewish line of worship and lifestyle and identity, okay, but it's not mandatory for a non-Jewish person, for a Gentile. Now, what do I mean by that? Okay. Let's say for instance, circumcision. That's a biggie. It is not required that that Gentile men be circumcised. Paul was very, very explicit about that. He says, he was speaking to Gentile Galatians. He said, circumcision profits you nothing. And if you do that, then you're bound by all the laws that the Jews are bound by. So that supposes then that if you don't do the circumcision for that purpose of becoming a Jew, then you're not required to do all the other things. And so we know that in Acts 15, they said, well, we're not going to put on to the Gentiles all the things that we have. Okay, the wearing of the tzitzit. That's a Jewish identity marker. All right, and now we have certain other customs that have been adopted over the years. For instance, wearing of the kippah. That is a Jewish identity marker, but it's not biblically mandated. the ultra orthodox that have the peyot, the side locks, that is an interpretation of the law that says don't round the corners of your beard. I don't know what rounding the corners of your beard means, but those are things that I would say, those are not something that non-Jewish people have to do. Maybe even they shouldn't do it. Now, kosher laws, I've had people ask me, well, I'm a Gentile and I like ham sandwiches. I said, okay, God never told you couldn't eat a ham sandwich if you're a Gentile. If you're a Jew, it's not the same. It's quite the opposite. He told us we cannot eat pork. We cannot eat shrimp. We cannot eat lobster, crabs, so forth. But for the Gentile, go ahead, you can do that. But I can also point to, pretty valid reasons why that it would be best if they didn't eat the bottom feeders, as it were, the shrimp and the crabs and the lobsters and catfish and the predator fish like sharks and so forth. Because God said, no, don't do that. He did it for reasons of health as well as a reason of holiness or separation from the nations. All right. So, but is it mandatory for a Gentile? I do not believe that it is. Okay. Now you may argue with me, and that's fine. And I'm not gonna, so you can discuss it. I'm not going to argue with anybody over that. It's just the way I feel that it is. And I'm not going to condemn someone that's in our synagogue in the Tree of Life if they eat a ham sandwich. I mean, not even ham on rye. That's not. I'm not going to get onto you for that. With cheese on it, even no, we're not going to call people pagans, denigrate people. The same with. I believe what we should be doing is showing love to people, showing the love of Yeshua to people, and not going around calling people names. All right. And I have seen so often where people talk about if you celebrate Christmas on the 25th of December, then you're nothing but a rotten, no good pagan. And I have a lot of heartburn with that and cutting people down and that sort of thing. And same with I used to know a rabbi that wouldn't even say the word Easter. He would call it the E word because it was Ishtar. Well, Ishtar has nothing to do with Easter in etymologically speaking. The two names are as far apart as Easter had something to do in the Teutonic languages of the sunrise, and Ishtar was a goddess in Mesopotamia and Canaan. So they were completely different, different wording and origin of the words. But people get so hung up over that, and then look for an opportunity to separate themselves from other people and make themselves look better or something. I don't know. This lesson tonight, I kind of wanted to get into some of this so that you'll know some of these people. And there are, and if it says Hebrew Roots Network, like I said, I know some of these people. I have met some of these people. I have eaten dinner with them, broken bread with them. We disagree. And but they I believe that their theology is faulty, but it's not something that I'm going to call them names for. It's just not something that I'm going to do. And so I think it's just important that, again, get into the scriptures, know what you believe and why you believe it. And if any of you have questions as to you run across somebody that, and people have asked me now, what about and I'll give you one example. Okay, and I've eaten breakfast with Michael Rood, and he's kind of a showman. Okay, and some of his theology is wonky. I'd say stay away. Monty Judah is another one. Monty Judah puts out on he's written stuff and said stuff that says the book of Hebrews should not be in the Bible because it does not require Gentiles to keep the law. And so he said, I don't know that Hebrews it's heresy and it should not be in the Bible. Well, guess what? I can't go along with that. And so there again, that's one that Lamb and Lion in Ministries is Monty Judah. And plus Monty Judah has set several times the date for the coming of the Messiah. Well, guess what? Nobody knows. Yeshua said nobody knows but the Father. And so for someone to set a date for the coming Messiah is foolish. And so don't follow that. Just don't follow that. And so anyway, I'm done for tonight. I've unloaded some of this stuff for you, unpacked it so that you're familiar with how it came out of this 2-stick prophecy in Ezekiel and what it means and how it impacts us even today in some of our theology. So are there any questions that someone may have?
No, you explained it very well. Thank you.
Okay, so you're no longer mad at me for saying Christians are pagan,
No,
huh?
no, I was not mad. I just wanted an explanation.
Yeah.
No, that's not true. Okay, thank you. Good night.
All right. Okay. Any other comments or questions on that on any of this part here? All right. Well, if there's not, then y'all have a good week and a good Labor Day, and just enjoy the blessings of Yeshua. Here in Texas, we're enjoying the blessings of rain, and my garden is once again thriving and exploding with produce, and all the stuff that I brought to synagogue yesterday and gave away, I picked that much or more this morning. So the Lord is good. He's blessed us very, very, very much. So Lila Tov, Shavua Tov, all you guys, and you have a good week. And again, if you have questions as to some of these teachers out there, give me a shout, and we can look at their theology. I'm not going to cut a guy down, but I'm going to look at his theology and say, okay, I believe that their theology is good, bad, or ugly. Okay, so God bless all of you, and we will talk to you next week.